This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week are two stupendous human beings that I know, Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
And Kate Lamphere.
Hi.
It's the Kate and Kate special. This is a once in a very long time kind of opportunity for you listeners out there. This is going to be a fantastic episode. I can already feel it in my bones, or I should say in my jellies, because who didn't love Detective Pikachu? I know I did. We're not here to talk about Pokemon or anything like that, as much as I'd like to. Instead, we're going to be talking about comic books. So let me ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate Scotchless.
I went to two different libraries and pulled out stacks and stacks of books to read for our topic this week, which is adaptations of YA books. And so that has been most of my comics reading this week. But I also checked out Afar #1. I actually did the $1 Image #1 issue when I went to Free Comic Book Day. It was one of the things I picked up at my shop because, you know, it's always good to support your shop when they're giving you free stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And the cover was pretty, and when I opened it to a random page, it was a nice drawing of whales, and so who wouldn't want that in their life? Mm-hmm. This is the series by Leila Del Duca and Kit Seaton. It's interesting, as just having the #1 was frustrating, because the stuff that was interesting is that basically when she goes to sleep, she's getting transported to other worlds, like astral projecting, and that's cool, but you wouldn't know that that's what's happening unless you read the little, like, quote summary of what it's about. And so I think this probably reads a lot better as a trade, because not enough happens in the first issue to really get what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I wanted. I remember
seeing the art for this and being kind of blown away by the cover, but I never actually had a chance to check it out.
I think I'm going to check it out from the library kind of thing, because I was a bit on the fence, and I'm not sure if that is just because I only had this one issue and it needed more time to do world building and all that, the way that sometimes fantasy books do. I am curious why they didn't do what they did for Image does fairly frequently with #1s that need to do a lot of world building all at once. We'll give them a long first issue that's, like, you know, just a lot thicker, like Monstrous did that.
Right.
I think that would have served this book well, because without having read the little quote about what it's about, I wouldn't have understood that she was, like, going to sleep and going to other worlds and stuff. So
interesting.
Yeah. How about you, other Kate? Kate and Kate doing Kate things.
I read Flying Witch by Chihiro Ishizuka. This is pretty much what it sounds like. A girl comes to stay with her cousins to train as a witch, and as the story progresses, it's clear that although she's a witch and she has a lot of potential power, she only really uses it to fly her broom, which comes up as a part of the plot when her sister shows up, and everybody gets really excited, and she shows her how to summon crows, and then she says, "My camel misses me," and then she portals back to Egypt.
What?
So, in the rest of this book, the main girl learns about farming, and there's a very wonderful panel or page where it shows her chasing a pheasant across the farm back and forth, and one of her cousins says, "Oh, she's tilling the farm." So
what?
So this manga is a pretty fun book, and I'm pretty sure that I grabbed this first volume because my library had 3 or 4 volumes of it, and I absolutely want to know what else happens, and if she does explore her magic more, or if the sister shows back up from Egypt, or if she learns more about farming. I'm very intrigued. It's very cute. There are a lot of wonderful secondary characters that are well developed. I've actually never seen Japanese accents referred to in manga before, and in this one, the dad of the cousins actually speaks with an accent, and that's clear by the way that things are spelled. So that was really intriguing, and I'm kind of wondering if I looked up those dialects, if I'd be able to tell that there are Japanese accents, being only an English speaker myself. So it's a cute book. I recommend it. It's very delightful.
Yeah,
Mike,
it looks like kind of I Wikipedia'd the name of this because I'd never heard of it before. It looks like a kind of like a slice of life comic that also involves like learning about magic. Would you say that's an apt description?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. It seems like the majority of characters in the world don't know that magic is real, but when this girl shows up, her cousins seem to be in on it, and her cousin's girlfriend, I don't know. She's like, "Oh, there's magic? Okay."
Interesting.
So
interesting.
What did you read, Mike?
For me, I sat down, I read a bunch of books, a lot of X-Men books, but I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about, I read Wasted Space #9. I don't want to go into this too much because, spoilers, it's also my pick of this week. So all I want to say is praise be to Yam, and holy shit, issue #9 left us with a huge cliffhanger, and I have so many fucking questions that number 10 had better answer. But the thing I do want to talk about is Invisible Kingdom #1. This is by G. Willow Wilson and Christian Ward. This is one of those Dark Horse books that came out under the Karen Berger line, and for those of you that don't remember, Karen Berger was basically the reason why Vertigo was so fucking awesome for so many years, and then there was this huge controversy when they just dumped Karen Berger as this editor over at Vertigo, and people were like, what the hell, there doesn't really seem to be a reason, and when she did interviews, she was like, it seemed arbitrary, and Dark Horse, being the clever company they are, scooped her right up and was like, hey, why don't you just run an entire line of books from Dark Horse and make some really cool shit. And Karen Berger has a very good eye for strange books that are going to sell really well. I don't know how else to describe it, but nonetheless, all of the Berger books that I've read so far from Dark Horse, such as The Seeds, have been really good. And I will say The Invisible Kingdom, #1, this is a really cool book just from the get-go. Like I said, G. Willow Wilson, she's diving into some deep sci-fi stuff, and if anyone knows anything about Christian Ward, if you've looked into any of his art, such as work that he did on Odyssey with Matt Fraction, or the work that he did on Black Bolt with Saladin Ahmed, those books are fucking gorgeous, and the space stuff is the coolest thing. So imagine a whole book that's just pure high-level sci-fi. So honestly, this pairing is killer for a comic book. I think Willow is leaning really, really hard into deep sci-fi territory, which I'm 100% on board for. Lots of space mystery and cosmos and eldritch evils from beyond the veil kind of things. And this is stuff that I'm really, really into. I was a little thrown. There's like a parallel storyline that's going on that doesn't really seem to be related until the very end. And I was a little thrown by that until like the last couple pages of the issue. And my brain just exploded with like oh my God, this is going to be so much bigger than I thought. So I know there's a few issues out in this series because the first issue came out maybe 2 or 3 months ago, but I'm definitely going to keep reading. It's very likely that I'll just wait for the trade at this point, but issue #1 really sold me. Like, and at this point, I'll try anything that Christian Ward is doing, so I'm totally on board. But it's a really cool looking book, and I really hope that the rest of it is as amazing as the first issue. And I have no doubt, like, G. Willow Wilson is a talented, fantastic writer, and so I'm really looking forward to the next couple of issues of this book.
That's good to hear. I keep looking at this at my local comic shop and considering picking it up.
It's a beautiful book. Like, I am almost kind of kicking myself for not grabbing the first issue in physical, because Christian Ward's art is just to die for, and it's beautiful to read on like a computer screen or on a tablet. But I'm guarantee you that in person, it's going to be even better. So, yeah. Otherwise, let's talk about comic books that are coming out this upcoming week. Comic books are dropping on May 29th, 2019. What are you both excited for? I already kind of played my hand on this, so let's just jump over to you, Kate Scotchless.
I'm looking forward to Stranger Things 6, #1. Now,
What?
That is not confusing at all. So 6 is spelled out as in the way 11 was named 11, 6 is 6, and it's the first issue of this.
Lore.
Are you
There's so
still
much
with
lore.
me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the first prequel comic series to come out. It's written by Jody Hauser with art by Edgar Salazar and Marissa Louise. And so it's about 6, and she has precognitive abilities and has ended up a pawn of the government that wants to harness that power, obviously, because it's Stranger Things. I'm excited for it. I want more backstory for all these different kids other than 11. I was very here for that part of the last season, and I think this is going to be perfect for getting hype for the next season that's coming out soon.
I've heard that Jody Houser did a really good job on the current series that's going on. Have you read any of that, Kate?
No, but I've liked some of her stuff before. She wrote Faith, didn't she?
I think so. She also did that Catwoman series for anyone out there. I heard that was very good, and then DC kind of screwed the pooch on it, but that's neither here nor there. Jody Houser, very talented writer.
Yeah. Also just a very good person.
Oh, yes, also that. Kate, what about you? What about you, Kate Lamphere?
I am excited for Coda number 12. I've talked about this on the show before, so I'll just mention that this is the last issue and that these books have been building up for me because it's very frustrating with such a complex world that I would have to wait a month between issues and then forget like all of the fine details that are actually important to the story.
Such a size barrier problem.
Yeah.
I am purposely trade weighting this, so I almost picked this because being the last one means I get it now.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, I'll have all of them shortly, so you can borrow them as soon as I've read all of them. But it's a very colorful book, both in the world building and character development, and physically the art. So I'm excited to finally sit down and read all of this issue back to back story. As if it were a trade. Mm-hmm. There we go.
Yeah, I'll be picking up the trades of Volume 1 and Volume 2 for this, because I love Cy Spurrier, but I think, Kate, when you first started reading this, you were like, this is way too complex to read in single issues.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that I trade weighted for it.
Yeah, as soon as I see Cy Spurrier's in a book, I both want it and also want it in trade.
Yeah, see, he's got to go work for TKO, and then he can just put out 6-issue miniseries that all in one go, and you can just read it all in one go.
Well, I hope they publish this as one trade, because isn't this a 12-issue maxi?
Yes, it's 12 issues. I don't know if they're going to do like 2 volumes or just a large one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know the first volume came out. Oh. So I think they're going to probably publish it as 2 and then eventually do like a all-together one. Yeah. That's just how Image rolls.
There was kind of a break in the story. Like there was a pretty good switch point, I think, because I think I stopped reading the issues around issue 6 or 7, which is usually where they start binding things into a volume, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that it would read pretty well in trade, even if you have to wait for the second trade.
I wonder what the cutoff point is, because the Spire, they put out all as one volume, but I think that's like 8 issues? 9 issues?
Yeah, I think it was 8 issues. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's also, it's pretty big. It's also Boom Studios, right? Like that's Boom Publishing versus Image. So
I forgot that wasn't Image.
Yeah, it's always different depending on the publisher. Now I'm double checking myself to make sure that that's right. I'm pretty sure. Nope. Coda is also from Boom. I'm a dummy.
You can write Mike at IRCB.
I corrected myself. It's Coda is also from Boom.
Subject line.
Yeah.
Dumb. Yeah.
Honestly, if we got emails from people that said actually, I think I would cry. I would break down wherever I was and just start crying with laughter, sadness. All these emotions would just take me over. Anyways, hold on. Let me tell you about the book that I'm excited for this week. I already played my hand. I know. But I'm very excited for Wasted Space number 10. This is Michael Morici with Hayden Sherman on art and colors, with Jim Campbell on letters. I know I got to get everything right here. Otherwise, some folks on the internet are going to call me out. But all I want to say is I got to know what happens in issue 10. I read issue 9 like last night or the night before. And like, they've been building, I'm just going to put some general open things, minor spoilers, whatever. They've been playing with this idea of dropping nukes on the universe's elites for a long time. And the way that issue 9 ended, I feel like Michael Morici is playing a joke on everybody, like in his synopsises for this book, because the way that issue 9 ends, I don't know how there's more book after issue 9. That's the way that I can... That's the only way I can say it. You could take that as you will. I gotta know what the hell's gonna happen. So I'm very excited for issue number 10 of this, and I praise be to Yam that there is more of this book. I want more of this book forever. So if you guys haven't read Wasted Space, I highly recommend it, because Raggedy Joe got on my ass about it, and boy, now I love this book. It's a great sci-fi. So, anyways, let's take a break, and I will stop being a spaz about these sci-fi books, and instead we can start talking about young adult adapted books into comics.
Look, they're great. Okay, trust me.
And manga, and all I want to say is I'm just very not familiar with this subject. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. For our show this week, we are talking about something that quite honestly scares me to death. Young adult books adapted to comics and manga. I didn't think that there was this many options, and then I talked to Kait and Kate, and it turns out there's an entire underground secret society of people that are reading young adult books that are adapted to comics and manga. Now, a little bit of that is a joke, but I genuinely was surprised at how many books out there that were adapted to comics and manga. Like, there are just the list that we have here that Kait and Kate have read is huge, and yet there are hundreds and hundreds more. Like, I'm very curious as to how this even became a thing, but let's just go into this. Kait and Kate, you both dig on this stuff. What are some of your favorites? What gets you hooked in? Because obviously you're reading the books and then you're reading the manga, or is it like something different?
I think the first book that I realized was available as a comic was actually Twilight years and years ago.
Wait, there was a Twilight comic? Okay. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do that the entire time. Yes. Okay, so there was a Twilight comic. I didn't realize that.
And that's the first one that I noticed, but there are so many more books that have been adapted, and although I'm reasonably sure that I have read that one, it didn't make much of an impression. So there's a lot more that I can talk about that did. And
that's
that
all right.
I highly recommend.
And I guess before we really get too deep in on this, like the idea of what a quote unquote young adult book is there like a specific definition that really suits these types of books?
So it's an age range demographic. When you're looking at the publishing industry, they talk about like middle grade, YA, and then adult. And so there's certain things that make something solidly in the adult category, like significant violence, sexual content, stuff like that. And
swears.
Yeah, real bad swears. But like you can have swears in YA. You just can only have certain swears.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Like you can say the S word, shut up.
Oh,
that was a big one in our house.
But really, like there is like a specific thing. It's like the type of story and the type of topics that they usually cover, right?
So one of the easy ways to tell who any product for kids is made for is by the age of the main character. And so for children's, it's usually the character will be a year or two older than the intended demographic. So, like, if you're writing a book for a 9 or 10-year-old, your character might be 11 because kids always want to be bigger. The next biggest kid is, yep, exactly.
Gotcha.
So that's an easy go-to way of figuring out who they're aiming for. Also, the vocabulary level, stuff like that. But I definitely have books on my list here that I'm talking about that are solidly middle grade fiction, but I'm counting it because they're all shelved together at my bookstore and library. It's
Gotcha.
just the not adult section of comics versus the, oh no, this is Watchmen and Deadpool comics over here in the dirty manga.
But chimichangas. All right. Sorry. So I guess to go into this further now, I guess the question here is, so you guys have read a lot of these books that were already adapted. Like, what are some of the examples of books that you were like, I need more of this. I want to see how this was interpreted as a comic or as a manga?
So, as far as I can tell, now this is very based on what is available to me when I walk into my local bookstore and my library. But as far as I can tell, if any property is a cash cow, like Twilight or Harry Potter or anything like that, it frequently, if it gets the movie treatment, it's frequently getting some graphic novel treatment too, because it's just yet another thing they can milk out of it,
Right.
So some of them are a lot better than others, and a lot of the ones on this list I didn't read until we decided to do this episode. And for me, it's more a curiosity, the same way I go see these movies if I've enjoyed the book, because I'm curious to see what they did with it. And I'm interested to hear what Kate's experience is, because it sounds like you have read some of these graphic novels before the books. And that's definitely not something that I've experienced before. And I'm wondering if it makes them a lot better.
The only one that I didn't actually realize was a novel before I read the comic was The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud, which I actually found out wasn't...
Such a good book series.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was a prose novel until I talked to you about how much I enjoyed this comic that I picked up at the library, and you were like, wait, like the books?
Yeah, guys, for the general public, just so you know what a good friend I am, I gave books 1 and 3 of this to Xander, and he can cherish them forever. Not book 2. I'm not that good of a friend to give him the complete trilogy, but I did give him 1 and 3.
But I haven't read the novel of this yet.
Oh,
but
Xander
I did
has
really...
it. You can borrow it.
Okay, that's good to know. I will steal it for you and then give it back to you.
Yeah, I'm doing that moving thing where you realize how many books you own, and then you give that burden to your friends.
Yep, it's a good strategy.
Yeah.
But I did really enjoy the Amulet of Samarkand. It was really colorful, in the way of young adult graphic novels.
Not all of them, it turns out, but yeah.
Yeah, weirdly. But it was a really well-paced story about, I think it was about a kid that ends up with this amulet that has a bunch of magical properties in it, and then he has some kind of, isn't it
he summons a djinn, but then the djinn used to be super powerful, and so he's real cocky and stuff, but in current era, he's not very powerful at all, and they're up to hijinks and theft and stuff. It's like the best kind of kid fantasy YA, where children are smarter than adults, and they're definitely doing crimes.
Sounds like Artemis Fowl, which I could also talk about.
I love the Artemis Fowl books.
Right, okay, so, without, jumping all over the place for different books, what was it... To go back to kind of my original question, are there books out there that you've read and then you're like, I need more of this, I need to see this adaptation, and then you've picked up the manga or picked up the comic adaptation? And I guess another side question to this is what makes a book go from YA prose novel into manga or comics? Is there a pattern that you guys have noticed to see it goes from a book, it gets a movie treatment, and then a comic comes out or a manga comes out? What determines what type of comic is made off of those books?
I've actually kind of noticed I don't notice the comics until the book has been out for a few years and the enthusiasm has kind of died down.
Yeah.
So it seems like they release a comic when they want to try to kind of reinvigorate that same market, which is valid because I go and read them.
Yeah. I would, I think part of that is just the time it takes to create them too, because some of them have legit art that takes time. Right. The Percy Jackson's and the Olympians has a bunch of graphic novels for each book, adaptations.
They do?
Yeah, the Rick Riordan series.
Oh,
and the
goodness.
art it's Tomas Gaspar, and the art is really good. That's the color work. The color work is really good. The art is also good, but the colors are what make you pull it out of the library. But the Disney Hyperion owns them and have just been cranking them out. And that's one of the ones that works really well because it's such an action-focused series that it lends itself to comics. The problem is that they drew Annabeth totally wrong. Just completely, that is not what Annabeth looks like. And that is a key problem for me anytime I go to these after already having read the book, because you see someone else's visualization of a character and they're just never correct.
Yeah.
Right. I had this problem with the Dresden Files, but that's a whole other thing.
Yep.
That series has its own set of problems on top of characters not looking right. But it's still not necessarily YA either. But my experience with this is very, very limited. I'll be completely honest here. Up until last night, I was like, oh shit, I should probably read some of this stuff rather than just show up to the show with nothing to add. And so I read most of the Beautiful Creatures manga that was put out, and I was like, I feel like I've heard of this before, and so I googled the name of it, and I was like, oh yeah, there was that movie that came out.
Oh, the movie was a dumpster fire.
It had Emma Thompson.
So dumb.
Well, you say that, except for as I'm reading this manga, I'm like, oh, this is just the trailer. I got a little over halfway through the book, and I was like, this is just the trailer from the movie. Is this what the book is like? Is it whatever? And I posted in the chat, and it seems like the series is very different. According to Kate and Tia, you both were just like, no, this book is totally different than the manga. So I'm curious, how do you guys feel about when, you read a book and you love a series and then you read the comic book or the graphic novel and the story itself, not just the art or the depictions of the characters, but the story itself is like drastically different in order to maybe appeal to a quote unquote different market who's consuming these?
So the reason it's different isn't that the actual plot points are different. It's different because that series is, the books are all very from the internal point of view of the narrator, right? So it's lots and lots of inner dialogue, inner thoughts, and you don't get like any of that hardly in the manga or movie because that's really hard to do visually, right? Unless you made it like the wordiest comic ever with just tons and tons of thought boxes. Right. But it also is so weird as a manga because he has a connection that I don't want to spoil with the female lead character, but it is confusing to depict visually this power they share that makes sense in a way that it was very easy in the books because you're just describing it, right? And so the books are very atmospheric and all very, you're in this teenage boy's head as he's both, being a teenage boy and also trying to figure out and solve this mystery with magical realism and all that stuff.
Right.
So I think that's where it's so different versus something like, what are the James Dashner book series called? It's like Maze Runner and Scorch Trials and books like that, and books like the Percy Jackson books are all just action stuff, so it's very easy visually versus books that have a lot more going on in characters' heads.
Gotcha.
That might have been part of what I had problems with the Golden Compass adaptation.
Yeah.
My biggest problem with that adaptation was the way that they drew the main character's face. Like the art was much different than the majority of the YA adaptations that we've seen, where it's kind of a modern, kind of bubbly art style. Right. I want to say. And this one was a lot of line work. Had really natural colors, which I actually didn't mind, except when it came to faces. Some of the faces were just really difficult to look at. Like Lyra, the main character's face, was kind of like weirdly bulbous, and her eyes were way too far apart.
Oh, she's supposed to be so sweet and cute. Yeah,
and the entire story was focused on her, so you saw her and multiple panels in a page. So, but I remember the novels also being a whole lot of her inner thoughts, right, and her figuring out the mystery of what is dust and like what's going on, like who's her parents and how does that matter to her, and you lose a lot of that nuance when you only have a visual medium where you can't really involve a whole lot of the character's interior monologue.
So would you guys say that you enjoy a lot of these, or is it just like a handful that you don't think work as well because the books themselves are written more like as an heavy internal monologue?
The Golden Compass is the only adaptation that I haven't enjoyed.
Gotcha.
So I love most of them.
I find them pretty hit or miss. I really like the Graveyard Book graphic novels. I think it's 2 volumes. It seems like Neil Gaiman books tend to be turned into comics for obvious reasons. There's one of Coraline too, but I didn't like the Coraline one. That one, all the art is done by P. Craig Russell instead of Graveyard Book. He only does some of it, but the art in Coraline, like in my mind, that book is so dark and atmospheric and like creepy, like dark in the shadowy way, like visually dark. And the comic is not. It is bright and light colors, and it is definitely creepy, but in a totally different way. And I also am used to having the Coraline depiction from, remember that animated movie that they did of it? And so having yet another totally different look from not what I envisioned when I was reading the book and not what the movie looked. I don't know. That one just didn't click as well for me because of all that. But the big thing was the color just seems so off tonally to me for the book. But I think by and large, the big thing is how well it's adapted, because problems like that, going from internal to visual and stuff like that, those can be overcome to an extent by a really good adapter, someone who's really proficient with comics. And obviously some people are just better at it than others. And then the more action-focused ones that are just they just lend themselves a lot better to comics. So I really like the Sea of Monsters. Of the ones I checked out and read part of to talk about them, I think that's the one that I'm going to make sure I finish before returning it to the library. And I'm not confident that I read this book. Like, I definitely remember some of these plot points, but it might just have been my sister telling me. So it's like, I remember it less than I remember the other ones.
Gotcha.
I'm curious, Kate, if you checked out A Wrinkle in Time's graphic novel.
I haven't. I didn't know that it existed until I saw it in the notes.
It's weird. It's the only one. So it's a very cartoonish, stylized line work with all of the colors are black, white, and blue. And so it's very interesting to me. It was an interesting art choice especially for a children's book to go with that, because you'd think kids might be less forgiving of interesting art than adults. You know what I mean? Like something that's different. So I wonder how it did, honestly.
Yeah, I've never read that book. I feel bad. Like, I feel like a lot of these, I'm like, oh, I've heard of all of these books, but I haven't read any of them. Like, I think my list of young adult books that I've read are the ones that I put in our notes, which are like Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Red Rising, and I only read the first Red Rising book.
I haven't read that one yet.
It's okay. Don't read it. And then I read the Maze Runner series, and because I don't know what it was, but I was obsessed with that series for a moment.
I only read the first one.
And you know what? You shouldn't read the rest of it, because on the whole, it's not like a great series. But I, for some reason, was really into it when I was reading it.
Did you like the movies?
Audiobook. I only watched the first one. And quite honestly, I don't remember a lot of it, because I think I was mad at the adaptation.
Yeah.
Because they take so many shortcuts.
Yeah.
To get rid of, I don't know. I love the thing about YA books that get me, because I'm such a sucker, because The Hunger Games ruined my brain.
Yep.
Is that, like, I love the idea of we're in this dystopian world and everything's bad, and oh no, our main character is so special, and because they don't fit in any of the circles of the world that we've created, and that makes everyone mad. You know.
Yes.
I love that stuff. It sucks me right in.
Have you read Divergent?
No.
He's so up your alley.
I've been telling myself that I'm going to just not read the books and only watch the movies.
No, don't do that to yourself.
They didn't make the last movie, so
I really want
them.
I really want to hurt myself, though. Okay, you don't understand. I know that those movies are bad.
Okay. Well,
no, I'll read. That's the thing.
This
like,
has
I
been a
don't read a
tragic
lot
ending to I read comic books.
Well, that's the thing. I don't read a lot of YA, but like getting into this Beautiful Darkness or Beautiful Creatures manga like wasn't hard for me to jump in. I kind of smelled out the plot, right from the get go. But it's still an interesting thing, and I know the Beautiful Creatures manga is not perfect or anything, but I mean, I forget that jumping into YA books is so easy. It's so easy to just get sucked in, and next thing you know, you're 150 pages in, and it's like, oh shit, like. That's a really easy, entertaining story that I just read. It's not going to like change the world or, make me think super differently about everything and everyone that I've ever met, but it's still very entertaining stuff. And I have to imagine that when creators are taking these books and they're reading them and they're trying to adapt them, like whether or not they're trying to keep it one-to-one for the story, they're also trying to say, well, this book was really entertaining. How do we make it visually exciting for people in a way that's going to keep them reading and say, oh, this is a slightly different take on a book series that I already love. Maybe it's changing the way that some characters look or changing some scenery to say like, oh, this is different, but it's different in a good way. And it sounds to me like you guys have experienced maybe a mixture of both, where you've been like, oh, this is a good change or that was a bad change. I don't like how that character is portrayed, but showing how this building looks actually clears up a lot of confusion I had in my mind. I think it's all across the board. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on this. But how did you guys feel about, like, did you have any other books that you really enjoyed that you wanted to bring up today?
I'm gonna correct you here, Mike, or clarify.
Okay. Clarify.
YA books are popcorn fun and not meaningful or life-changing for us as adults. I would say for their target demographic, they can be really, really meaningful and life-changing and thought-provoking, because the first time you come in contact with something or the first time something clicks is a lot different than when you've had that in your world for, 20 years. So I would say some of these are actually pretty profound stories. Like A Wrinkle in Time is a really big deal about this girl who is dealing with the family stuff, but is really, really intelligent, and it's okay to be intelligent, and that is actually it helps her save the world. And so many stories of these are about like finding yourself, but also your own power and your own voice. And I think, at least for me personally, when I was 11, 12, 13, and just like the total dweeb, right? Like they do make a difference.
Yeah. So I guess, I wasn't trying to necessarily hand wave all the books.
Okay.
I mean, as a 30-year-old adult,
right?
I should say this isn't it isn't life-changing stuff, but I think that, again, it's because I'm not the target demo. Like, because if I think back at young adult books that I read when I was that age, at the AIM demo, like, those books broke my brain.
Right? Like
reading
The Giver when you're
Hobbit,
8. Yeah.
Yeah. Reading The Hobbit, reading Harry Potter at like such a young age, like, yes, I totally agree with you there. So thank you for correcting me, because I didn't mean to like brush off all these books, because they are really important books, and especially if they can be entertaining and fun for adults, like imagine how entertaining and fun they are for the demographic that they're aimed at.
Yeah, and sometimes it's good to have reminders of some of those messages that you don't necessarily get in adult, if you're reading just lit books or whatever.
Yeah.
I personally am curious to hear Kate's take on the Infernal Devices manga stuff, because I saw that when I was at the bookstore yesterday and like was laughing. So I have never read those books though. So Kate, take it away.
So I really enjoyed the prose novels even more. So back up a little bit. This is by Cassandra Clare. She also did The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, etc. That is currently, actually the show just wrapped up, the show Shadowhunters. So she is a very popular author. She's got a lot of world building, backstory that kind of ties all of her books together. And the Infernal Devices is kind of her... I almost want to say it's like a prequel series to the City of Bones series. It's all about a kind of Victorian setting where there's also steampunk, there's clockwork creatures, and then it introduces the whole angels and demons and magic world that you see in more of her books. I loved this YA series as prose novels. I thought that it was really kind of heartfelt. It introduced this world really well. There was a lot of kind of, this is the society that they exist in and the reasons why it's outdated, I guess, kind of sexist, and how these characters were going to help change that. And the comic book adaptation, I was very thrilled to see that this was adapted, because it hasn't gotten a movie adaptation. So I wanted to see what they were going to do with it, to see if it was going to bring in more audience, a bigger audience for these books. Except that I don't think they did a terribly good job, unfortunately. I feel like, it's not bad. I feel like if I just picked this up off the shelf without having read the prose books, I would have liked it. I might have read the second volume. And they did actually adapt the all 3 books, which is great, because I feel like most of these adaptations, they only get through part of the series. But I just feel like it lost a lot of the nuance between the characters that was clear in the books, probably because of the internal narration again. But there were definitely some characters that were sweeter, kinder, or kind of more self-contained, kind of within themselves. And that was lost with this very visual dialogue. Like, there wasn't a lot of narration in these books. So if you like the novels, I would still read the manga, but...
I haven't read the novels. I do have the first one I found at a used place for like 25 cents. So I have it, and I keep meaning to read it. But as I think we mentioned, maybe it was before we started recording, but I was talking about how I'm moving at the end of the summer, and I have so many books, you guys. I calculated it out. I could not, if I just read my books that I own that I have not read, and physical, we're not counting ebooks at this point, I could read just those for years, reading 100 books a year, because I have so many I've accumulated from these, like, sale places. Like, there's the PTO in Ann Arbor has like its own shop, like a resale shop, and some other like I go to Kiwanis Club and stuff too, and they'll sell them for like 10 cents. And how do you leave behind a beautiful hardcover of a book you want to read for 10 cents? But then I never have time to read. And here we are. And then you're like, friends, I want you to still like me after we move, so I'm not going to make you lift all these boxes of books. So I'm purging. It's rough. Call me Marie Kondo. Does this spark joy? Yes, it does. All of my books spark joy.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I did want to bring up Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. I've talked about this on the show before, but it's definitely worth mentioning again, especially because you guys had mentioned how some of these books can be very life-changing for younger readers. This book was very popular when it first came out. It stayed at the top of bestseller lists for a long time. It was adapted into a movie with Kristen Stewart. This has just come up again and again in our society, especially with the Me Too movement. I feel like it was kind of a literary... It was early on when those things started coming out, those stories, and I think that this book really helped with that because it's a story about a high school girl that gets abused
sexually
by
assaulted.
another boy. Yeah, thank you. And so I was really interested to see how they were going to adapt this really kind of heartbreaking but also very necessary and good novel. And I was impressed with what they did with it. If you're interested in this, go on Amazon. Their Look Inside feature is extensive for this book. So you could decide if you like it well before you get to the end of the book.
Cool.
But let me look up who the illustrator is, because Emily Carroll did the illustrations for this book. It's grayscale, but she does such a great job at making the main character look realistic. You can see her emotions on her face as she walks through her life. All of the side characters have different body types, hairstyles, clothing choices, all the things that are important when you're deciding how you want to present yourself to the world.
How did they do? Book. I'm very curious how this worked, because talk about a book that's all internal dialogue. I mean, the whole thing is that this girl has become more or less mute. How do they deal with that in a graphic novel? There's not a lot of actual dialogue. It is mostly narration. Okay.
With the narration is kind of off in the background area. There's no dialogue boxes or anything, and it's kind of got this handwritten look to the font. So it does kind of look more personal.
That's interesting. I guess let me, I think we've kind of covered a lot of things today. I'm wondering, maybe we have some final thoughts about young adult adapted manga and comics. Maybe you guys can give like your top recommendation or two before we wrap up. I will say, like, I'm still waiting for my Harry Potter.
I know,
same.
right?
Comic book series. Like, that's all that I want in my entire life is just hundreds and hundreds of Harry Potter comics. That's all that I can't believe, like, we've been talking about this and it sounds like the standard practice is like, cool, really popular book becomes a movie, gets a graphic novel treatment of some kind.
Yeah, or both.
Or manga. Give me a Harry Potter manga. Holy shit. Could you imagine a Harry Potter manga?
No. No, that is sacrilege.
Shut up. I would read the shit. All right, anyways, that's beyond what we're talking about here. I guess to wrap up this episode, could you guys tell us like what you really enjoy the most about young adult adapted comics and manga, and maybe give one or two of your favorites?
I like the graphic novel adaptations for the same reason that I like the prose books, which is that for me, at this stage in my life, they're easy, fun reads. I'm familiar with most of the themes that are going on. It doesn't take a whole lot of my concentration, which is great because I only have so much time to read in a day, so I can't really like dive deep into a book at this point in my life, unfortunately. I can't pay attention to like nonfiction or literature that has a lot of themes and you need to know a lot of details. Like, I just don't have that kind of time right now. So it's important to me that I can just enjoy a story for an hour and then do whatever I have to do for the day.
Right.
But these are also usually, in my experience, really well done. So it stays true to the source material. But then if you were to pick this up off the shelf without knowing the source material, they're still good stories.
Gotcha.
And I would recommend, I mentioned the Artemis Fowl series by Eoin Colfer. There were 8 prose novels and only 4 of them were adapted, sadly, but they ended at a really good spot. That I didn't really talk much about this. The art is really bright. There's this fairy technology that they do a really good job with. It was a lot of fun. I think I enjoyed these graphic novels more than I enjoyed the original prose novels.
Really?
Oh, wow.
And then Speak, I'll just mention that one again. That was so well done. Just like the art is beautiful. It's a wonderful story, even though it's really heartbreaking for part of it. So I have to recommend that one.
Yeah. Cool. So Laurie Halse Anderson writes a lot of, so she writes like the issues YA kind of thing. So she's written quite a few books that are the kind of books that you just want to give to like every adolescent girl and be like, listen, these are things we don't talk about enough. And if, you know, so like she has one called about eating disorders and this one about assault and, you know, anywho. I would also do that one. I would say for our listeners in particular, if you like Neil Gaiman's like Sandman type comics, I would definitely recommend picking up the Graveyard Book graphic novels. They are very well done. It is in a similar style and vein to Sandman. So if you are into that, I think this would be right up your alley. It's also a very good book if you are feeling like just reading the book. I think for me, so I do read literary fiction and nonfiction and stuff like that, but I tend to rotate through where I'll read like a heavy, dense book and then what I call like popcorn fiction, which is just like the blockbuster mindless flick that you go to and don't need to think hard and just are having fun. Or like some people call them cotton candy books, right? They're just like sugary nothing. And that's where YA comes into my life a lot of the times. And I do it more when I'm more stressed with other stuff or have been doing a lot of heavy textbook reading. I think the other thing for me is I love science fiction and fantasy. And so many of these series are sci-fi fantasy books. And so because we're not like in it 24/7, the ones that pop up on my radar at this point because of my age are the like creme de la creme that rise to the top, right? The like their best series are the ones that pop up onto my radar. And so it's rarely disappointing. The only thing I can't stand in YA is that trope of the love triangle. Well, the girl's so special and both these boys love her for instantaneous and not understandable reasons. That has been so overdone and I'm very over it. Give me at least some different variation on that, you know?
I think
about the
YA
Love
is kind
Square?
of getting out of that a little bit, thankfully.
Yeah, thank God.
Gotcha. Well, I'm just going to keep plugging Harry Potter until I die.
Yeah,
It
same.
would have to be done so well, though. Like, I'm afraid that they'll do it, and then it'll be bad.
Well,
Oh,
here's
it's far
what,
too late. It's
here's
far
what-
too late for them to do anything that would be happy for all of the fans. It's
that's
too
true.
much.
Here's what we need. We need a comic series that's in the universe of Harry Potter, but it's like different kids at the school. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I don't want Harry in my comic. I want kids that are there like 5 years after everything in the Harry Potter series has ended. Or
give us the 7 years before Harry Potter came to school.
Give me comics of his dad and, you know, Padfoot and Prongs and Wormtail. Oh my God, their adventures would be fantastic for a comic.
What we need is for Marvel to buy Scholastic so that this can happen, just like they did with, or excuse me, so Disney to buy Scholastic so that they could do this just like they're doing with all the Star Wars comics. Anyways, I'm so very much in love with the Harry Potter series. It doesn't help that I've been listening to this binge mode series, this series called Binge Mode, and it's all about Harry Potter. They also did a whole thing about Game of Thrones. So if you want to hear about all the information that's out there with Game of Thrones or all the information that's out there with Harry Potter, they do such a good job. And I've been listening to the Harry Potter series, and it just reminds me how much I love that. But anyways, this has nothing to do with comics. It's just me wishful thinking. So Kate, thank you guys for both reading a bunch of these comics and coming to talk about them. I think this is a really interesting discussion because it hits like this weird spot in comics where there's a lot of success already in the prose novels, and then you add the comics and it can add a lot more success because targeting that demographic of readers is very, very popular right now. So I mean, we'll do a follow-up in 3 years once you guys have read a bunch more, and we'll talk about it again. But yeah, so I guess I'm going to wrap up here and say you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Kate at Kate Elfier. You can follow Kate Scotchless elsewhere on the internet. I don't think she's on Twitter anymore.
Nah.
And you can follow me at Mike Rappett, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where we post all sorts of things. I try to post things on Twitter and Instagram, so make sure you're following us on both of those platforms.
You can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast. Without your support, this show wouldn't survive. Join now for access to exclusive audio and articles, early access to top of my pile posts, and more. And then we have a great Goodreads group. We've got weekly threads. This week's thread was Marvel graphic novel and trade paperback reading order. We also have a yearly reading challenge that I am trying to get through. There are so many good books on it.
Same here. I'm very much trying.
Yeah, I'm on the Goodreads struggle bus right now. Time is a thing that I want more of, please.
Same. Time Turner, please.
Yes.
Harry Potter again.
Yes, Harry Potter is relevant to every single conversation.
We have a website at rcbpodcast.com that has a pronunciation guide, merch, and zines.
You can rate, subscribe, and tell your friends, please. Share the show. If you haven't rated it, why not? It helps us. It's free for you. It's easy. It makes you look good because you're like sharing this with your friends and they're all excited about it now. You can also email all your complaints and hate mail to the show with comments, questions, jokes, especially Mike loves actually comments at ircb@destroythesybe.org.
Infinity Shred does all the music for our show. They're the best band in the universe. Make sure to check out their new stuff that's coming out very soon at infinityshred.com or on Bandcamp. Xander is the coolest guy in the universe. He also edits this show. I want to say thank you to him for all the hard work he puts into this whole I Read Comic Books, massive thing that we do. I want to say thank you to Kate and Kate for being on the show this week. You guys are amazing. I want to say thank you to the listeners out there for being just incredible people. My heart melted. Someone posted on Twitter that they picked up a book because of our recommendation last week. I almost died. That's such a cool thing to see. I love when people tell us about that. So until next time, comics are good, and so are you.